Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, welcome to another episode of The Wisdom of, where we unpack the deeper wisdom that people that have done things and achieved things that many haven't, have learnt, discerned from what they're doing. We live in an increasingly complex and technically driven world, global conflict, political, economic. There's a lot going on. And the great leaders look below the surface. They're not stuck at tips, tricks, and hacks. They're actually looking for the patterns underneath the deeper wisdom. And so my guest today, Oliver Garside, is a co-founder of an app for I'm going to read this because I love it. The co-founder and director of Rounded, a beautifully simple accounting and invoicing app built specifically for freelancers and sole traders. I'm pretty sure, Oliver, the words beautifully simple and accounting have never actually gone together in the past in any sort of copy anywhere, but you played a pivotal role in creating that platform. You have a background in marketing and customer experience and startup growth. And, you and your co-founders are in this world that quite a few people venture into today, which is establishing a technology company and then taking it to market. However, when we say quite a few people do that, it's still outside of the realm of what most people do. And it is different to starting up a services type company or something like that, where you can almost bootstrap it because the capital isn't required to the same level up front. You're not pre-revenue for as long as SaaS companies often are. You're not faced with all of the the change orders required. I mean, the phone providers and Apple and Google and others change their platform, and you have to change things. There's this constant. It's a pretty intense world, it seems to me, and we've worked with a lot of SaaS companies, and it is a challenging world. So it is certainly something that not everybody does, and yet you want this beautifully simple, great experience for sole traders and freelancers specifically. So classic market niche approach for their accounting and invoicing software. Kind of fascinating. And I'd love to just check in on the story behind that, and some of what you brought to that, because I'm not sure that it would be the box everyone would tick and say, this is what we're going to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, there are probably multiple strands to the story. I'll try and give it to you as concisely as I can. So at the time, we're talking 2015. So we're nearly 10 years old, which is an accomplishment for any SaaS company. I'd already made the decision through my own experiences. I was working with a big company that had come to an end, and I decided to take a leap and take a redundancy, which seemed the softest way that I was ever going to get to sort of go out there and explore getting involved with something that was my own.
Yeah.
I wanted something that I was going to be able to build that had a certain risk profile to it. And that I kind of got to the point in my career where I was sort of like, well, is all I've got building somebody else's dream? And I wanted to at least have a crack. I was at that point. I wanted to have a crack at building my own. And somebody I knew who was an entrepreneur said to me, "Listen, I know these two guys. They've built this app. It's just about to launch. They're both the technical brains behind it, but they don't really know what to do with it. And so with your background with sales, customer experience, customer success, it could be an opportunity for you." And really, in the end, what it came down to was that out of everything that I was exploring at that time, it seemed as good a punt as anything else, and it really was a punt. And I said to my wife, "Look, like there was no investment that I had to make. It was going to be sweat equity, and that if all went well, I'd end up owning a piece of the business, which was kind of what I'd negotiated." And so that was that. So when I joined Rounded, it was pre-revenue, had no customers. no marketing. The app was MVP, the first iteration of the app. And I was tasked with kind of getting the business moving from a standing start. And here I am nearly 10 years later.
Yeah, and it's used by a lot of clients. It's an Australian company, so it was pre-revenue, right? And that's the story for a lot of app companies. If we just dive into that history a little bit, that's the story for a lot of tech companies. Usually, a technical person built an app because they thought it would be a good thing for people to have, or I've met and worked with so many people who solved a problem for themselves, often with a whole bunch of spreadsheets bolted together with lookup tables and things like that, and going, well, this would solve everybody else's problem, so we'll build an app. So it often starts on the technical, which actually a lot of businesses do. Let's build the solution, then see if we can sell this thing. You come from a different angle, and so how do you create that? You might not have had resistance, but how do you create that shift to, like, they already had it built from what you're saying, you create that shift into, well, what does the market actually want, and how do we help them to understand that, and how do we make sure it's a great experience for them? There'd be tensions in there sometimes if things have been built already.
Yes and no. I mean, I guess I look back on it and I knew, I'd worked in software for a number of years, but I was never really that close to the building of any of it. I'm not a technical person
Yes.
myself. So the skill sets, there was a bit of luck there in terms of the complementary nature of it. And I guess what you're articulating there is the other side of the rounded story. And my co-founder, who was a freelancer and a sole trader,
Yeah.
was frustrated at the lack of purpose-built software base, that was fit for purpose for the Australian market. So built his own solution, which is what turned into Rounded. So my first job, having never worked in accounting, my background was HR and HR technology, was to try and understand who the customer was.
Mm-hmm.
And where they hung out, because again, it was I guess the two things that I realized is that there was no real enterprise sales to be
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
There are no multiple licenses to multiple people by virtue of the fact that you're just selling to sole traders.
Yes.
And so I needed to understand a little bit more about them, and I needed to find out where they were. And so that was probably the first part of the journey, which was just really diving into the customer.
And can you get to them at a reasonable cost of acquisition? Basically,
Well, I had to get to them at zero cost because there was
okay.
zero money.
That's a pretty clear budget.
Yeah.
So, with the way you stepped into the business, I often explore founder dynamics when there's multiple founders in a business, because sometimes it's best friends that got into something together and they start, but actually very often it's people that otherwise might not have gravitated towards each other, were they not doing this thing. And I suspect 10 years down the track with Rounded, a big chunk of that hinges off founder dynamics, and how did the three of you operate in order to drive this business forward. What have you learned about founder dynamics as you stepped into this? You'll put sweat equity in, so there's a whole lot of judgment being made, right?
Yep. And look, I mean, I think that's the kind of thing that you still learn about every single day. And it's certainly that there have been times when there have definitely been tensions, and myself, I've always just tried to, where I felt the tension. I can only really talk for myself, but I've always taken the approach that it's business first, and I have to put my own ego to one side, and I feel that helps with sometimes managing and navigating through difficult decisions, or,
Mm,
or decisions that may cause tension where there's opposing point of view. I think the reality is that we had some luck in that we naturally brought different things to the business. And so whilst there's overlap in decision making, sometimes, we really gravitated towards different areas that were our skill sets to start with. And so, especially in a very sort of small business, that allowed us the space to sort of explore what we wanted to explore in the early days, without stepping on each other's toes.
mm. Are there any core lessons that you or the three of you have discerned, or any really specific? I've asked this in the past, and I've had varying responses. Some people know, say we set up some specific agreements or we put some specific tactics in place. Was there any core lessons or anything specific that you and your co-founders talked about, and mechanisms, conflict resolution mechanisms or anything like that that you feel like has really served you over the last 10 years?
Look, I don't know if there's been anything specific. We have the same mechanisms in place that a lot of companies do around constitutions and shareholders agreements and that kind of thing.
Mm.
And they're sort of like insurance policies, right? You never really know how robust they are until it's probably too late. But yeah, as I said, we've been fortunate in that the majority of that time we have managed not to get to a point where it gets too difficult or anything like that. And I don't really. I wish I could tell you why that was. It may just be, it may just be down to a little bit of luck, and who knows what may happen in the future. But up until this point, it's been all right.
Do you all have a really clear view of where you want the business to get to?
I think that we've built the business and sort of molded the business around the fact that we all started this a little bit older.
Yeah,
We all had families, partners, that kind of thing. And so, the sort of the hyper growth rocket ship type thing, we've explored a lot of different avenues to build and scale the business. But I think that, we've valued our autonomy, very, very deeply. And so we've put a huge value on that,
yeah,
rightly or wrongly, depending on your perspective. And I think that that's allowed us. We've always wanted to make sure that we, created a great customer experience and a great product. And so we've never compromised on those things. And I think that's the thing that sort of bound us together.
yeah.
If we had one person that was looking for, huge VC funding or an IPO or something like that, and the rest of us weren't, then that may have caused some tensions. But it's been pretty consistent through that time.
Well, I think it's an interesting observation that you've had the conversations about, some of the things that matter. As soon as you say we all value our autonomy, it's almost like a core value that does actually affect decision making. And interesting comment about scale, where there's been conflict between founders, there's usually a difference in opinion about growth and where the business lands. And scale can be a double-edged sword. And scale almost always means giving up levels of autonomy in order to go and get the funding round or increase investors. It does dilute individual value, and but it also can give people enormous exits, and it has risk attached. And so I think having the conversation about scale versus growth is actually pretty important. Can we just backtrack to the idea of first principles? I'm really very interested in the idea of first principles, and particularly when you're producing a product or a solution for a niche that it's believed it was underserved. So founders and freelancers were an underserved market with finance and invoicing software, was the belief, which means you must be going to challenge some of the conventions that the other solutions have addressed, which must bring you back to some level of first principles thinking. I'd love to know some of the challenges that Rounded actually addresses for freelancers and founders that other solutions don't actually address, but also some of that first principles thinking, because I suspect you continue to have ongoing conversations at a first principles level as a business. So I'd love to just dive in that. This is that deep and profound first principles sort of thinking. What is it about your market? And this will help everybody that actually serves, the freelance market, the gig economy, that small to medium-sized founder-led business. What is it about that market that wasn't being served by bigger finance packages?
It's a really good question. And I guess so. If we talk first of all about first principle,
Yeah.
for us, the first principle has always been the customer. That's where we start and finish. And I think that if in hindsight, when I look back, the one thing that we've always had is a very clear idea about who our customer is.
Mm-hmm.
And that determines your brand voice,
Yeah.
That determines your product decisions, that determines your marketing channels and everything else. And sometimes it can be, difficult to resist the temptation to sort of go and chase after a shiny new thing. But it's something that we've managed largely not to do. That's not to say we haven't made some poor decisions, because we
Mm.
have, but that's not been chasing after to new customers. So if we go back and go, well, what did we do that nobody else did? I think there's a couple of things. If you think back to 2015, as individuals, we all were very used to, at that point, really good consumer software.
Mm.
So, Uber, Netflix, Spotify, any social media that you wanted, we'd all been using those for a number of years. They were ubiquitous and a very important part of our lives. And we as individuals were used to having access to that on our phones. Business software, still at that point, was largely very different. It was
Mm.
still had this enterprise focus. It still had the enterprise pricing, and was built not to necessarily be particularly aesthetically pleasing. It could be quite intimidating. You needed training. It was very expensive. And obviously at the time, and they still are, Zero, were the market leader. But they were built for small business, and sort of legally, tax wise, everything about a small business is different than being a freelancer. And
Mm.
so, freelancers found that they had to use something that was for overseas, so it didn't really understand what GST was, for instance, or it was built for a small business and it was just too complex or too expensive. I mean, Rounded, we use Zero
Yeah.
because Rounded wouldn't be suitable for us, but we have a finance manager who's trained to use it. If I had to use it, it would be disastrous.
Yeah.
So what my business partner, Grant, what he wanted was, uh, at its core, freelancer finances are quite simple. It's tracking money in and tracking money out.
Yeah.
And there is no reason, why that can't be done in a way that is not intimidating, that is built to look nice, that does have language inbuilt that makes you understand that, a debtor's ledger could just be a list of overdue invoices, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
So we built it for the end user, not their accountant, which is the other sort of difference. And we made very clear decisions about what it wasn't going to contain, as well as what it was. And I think that that's what's helped the business grow, and sort of, we get a lot of feedback around, I really thought that it was going to be a lot harder than it was.
Mm.
So we've just tried to take the intimidation factor out. We've tried to make it look nice. We've tried to, even though it's a business tool, the business model, and the way that we sell it and the way we want it to impact our users is much closer to a B2C type of thing. The kind of what you get when you pick up Spotify or you pick up your social media or whatever it is. That it's you don't necessarily have to be trained to use it. It's there's a lot about it that's quite intuitive. And I think that were kind of the core principles from the
Yeah.
start. That was what we wanted.
It's interesting. I had a management consulting company for the better part of 25 years, and doing very large projects with large multinational companies and things like that. And even in the business now, which is international, um, as a business, we're also pretty much money coming in and money going out. That's not there's it's pretty simple actually. And we have a client who's built a software platform, um, and they wanted to be able to offer their customers zero training. When you buy the software, zero training for staff. So how do you do that? Well, you base it on Google Maps, because everybody knows how to use Google Maps or Apple Maps. Everyone's already got the swipe. They already kind of know where they're going to find items, and you basically have zero training. I think you're right. We live in a world where rethinking at least micro business level software, it has an opportunity to be challenged. That's that first principles kind of thinking. Let's translate that into the customer experience, and 99% satisfaction rating. That's a great number, only to be beaten by 99.2, 99.8, and 100. So 99 is a great number. And it's extraordinary. So, yeah, that must go beyond the product itself. That must go beyond just the software. It must have to do with the company they're dealing with and things like that.
Well, again, it's almost part of the philosophy, and part of the mission and the vision. And again, it came down to, it was probably the first realization of something that we can do that doesn't necessarily mean or need, an upfront marketing budget that can become a very, very powerful tool. So again, for instance, the other competitors out there, if you were on their lowest tier, you were a sole trader or freelancer, they didn't necessarily want to give you a phone number to call because it was expensive to do so.
Mm.
They didn't necessarily want to provide high levels of support. But again, as I begun to understand the customer more, I could see that there was a frustration and an annoyance that, here I am as a genuine small business owner, and I can't get help with any of these tools that they're charging me vast amounts of money for.
Mm.
And so, again, the technology we used allowed us to talk directly to our customers from inside the app. We use a live chat tool, and in the beginning, it was just me. Thankfully now I don't have to do that anymore. I've got a very dedicated team that take care of that. But we still talk directly to customers. The sort of automated responses are still quite minimal, even in the days of AI. But
Yeah.
we could see in sort of online reviews, we could see in the feedback that we got from customers that, people were shocked that when they said, "Hey, I need some help," and a real person got back to them instantly and said, "Sure, how can we help you?" And so what we found was that as we did that more and more, obviously as we began to grow the customer base, is that became consistent feedback that customers felt heard, they felt valued, they felt supported, and they felt they were doing business with a company that really understood who they were, what they stood for, and what they were trying to achieve. And to this day, that is it's one of the most powerful marketing tools that we've ever had, and something that is now part of Rounded's reputation. That if you want to use Rounded, you are going to get a very hands-on support whenever you need it. And we work very, very hard to make sure that we try to create an overall experience. It's not just about the product; it's about the experience of being a Rounded customer and being, in our community, that we find our best customers, core customers, really appreciate.
And so it's not really about the business. It's not really about this. I mean, it is about the software, but it's one of the best marketing tools you've had. The best marketing tool you have is actually about the people in the company, as opposed to the software. Where do you mentioned AI, and I'm in a lot of conversations with people, in the networks that we're in worldwide, and there is a real conversation happening now about return to real, and okay, where's the people side of this? And do people want to talk to machines? And in finance software, trust is a big deal. All the data's in there, and data security and privacy, they're dependent upon you for their privacy, compliance in many respects with customer details, et cetera, et cetera. Where do you see Rounded taking the business in the context of AI, given what you've just outlined, such a human-driven approach to the market?
Yeah, so look, I mean, I think with AI at the moment, there's a number of areas that we already use it in the
Mm,
business.
mm,
Technically we use it. We again, just for anybody listening, we don't use it for any kind of production code or anything like that, but it's very useful for testing and grunt work and very sort of simple sequential sequences that you need to
mm.
test. So that helps us get through development sprints quickly. We're looking at using it a little bit more on the customer service side because there are a number of simple things that we think could make us more efficient. I think that there are some efficiency gains to be had there as well. So that's something that we're looking at the moment around where that is. But ultimately, I think that there is. We have to be conscious of the kind of application that we have. We are dealing with people's sensitive financial data. We are in an environment where people are very conscious of data breaks and security issues and that kind of thing. And we don't feel that we can really take liberties with that. Actually, our customers aren't really asking us for a great deal of AI
Mm.
because ultimately my belief is that, if you're a business owner, you don't want AI making decisions about what deductions are going to go into your tax return without some layer of your own oversight
Mm.
or without an accountant's oversight. So, we think that there's ultimately there's ways that we can work towards automating and streamlining, maybe using AI, maybe just using algorithmic methods and that kind of thing. Because again, going back to that money in, money out, it's actually inherently quite simple and there's a lot of admin that can be automated. But I think that we will always draw the line at decision making.
Mm.
Because again, if we make a mistake or we build an AI function inside our accounting application that makes a mistake and somebody's tax return is wrong, that could obviously potentially be quite catastrophic for us. So, we think that there's a balance there between we'll automate a whole heap of stuff that you don't have to do, but we'll show you what we've done and you have to
Yeah.
press the final button. So it's an interesting time. It's an
Oh, it's
interesting time
very
for sure.
interesting. A previous guest that I've had on the podcast, Sheila Fitzpatrick, is a global expert in privacy and data security. And one of her comments really landed loud with me, that if she's talking to a CEO that says we have the best data security around, she already knows she's talking to someone who doesn't actually understand privacy. And she views AI as the greatest risk to companies' privacy compliance in whatever jurisdiction they're in, because you can't with absolute certainty say, here's where all the data is, and we're in full control of everything. And the world demands that. The breach, for example, the Latitude Finance breach, the data security isn't the issue. It's the data that was taken that is the issue. It's the privacy kind of breach. It's you've probably had a fair bit of empathetic design, because of how connected as a company Rounded actually is to the customer. I'm guessing sometimes customers have said things that you, as a company, you would never have thought of, and then you've kind of gone, "Oh, well, that would be good," or "That would be cool." And as companies use more and more AI, I'm wondering what your thoughts are about. You're in live contact with customers all the time as a business through your app. Is there a concern that companies might start to lose some of that empathetic, almost organic exchange that gives them real opportunity that they otherwise wouldn't have seen if they weren't in the conversation?
I think it's really easy to do. And I think if anybody listening to this, I think everybody will have had an experience where they've been a customer of a company, big or small, where they feel like they're just howling into a void and nobody's listening. I think any conversation with a phone company or a utility company, will probably have a lot of your listeners raising their eyebrows. We've all experienced it. And I think that there's a very fine balance. Again, this is where AI can be really good as a tool, but I've seen really good execution of AI. I've also seen mostly terrible execution of AI where it just adds to frustration and makes you
Yeah.
feel disconnected. So I don't know exactly sort of what the answer is there. We're sort of taking a fairly considered approach to it and have tested out a few things. For that very reason is that with the focus that we have on our customer, we don't want to be disconnected from them. Because it's again, I think that it's one of the most valuable things that I do, and I still try and talk to customers on a daily and weekly basis, just simply to maintain that level of connection.
Well, that was the Bob Ansett story, wasn't it? He'd go and work on the counter at the various car hire places and things like that every so often, just to be in front of the customer. Let's take a slight left turn. You know, you were interviewed for an article with Smart Company, and you were talking about, and let's talk about young people for a little bit. And you were talking, a work experience program was the secret sauce that took the company global, and the idea of work placements for university students, and sometimes the reluctance of companies to take that on. I'd love to dive in a little bit. What does that mean? What did you learn from bringing students into the business and involving them in some work placements and things like that? How did it take the business global? I know you talked about the benefits of startups and everything else, but it's not
Yes, I
something
think,
everybody does.
yeah, they're right. And actually, going back a fair way there, and I think we got involved in a initiative with a university for commerce students who were going through a process of trying to take a real life example of a company that uh, could expand globally.
Mm.
And I think for us, there was just perhaps a joy in a fresh set of eyes, just some fresh ideas. They've got that sort of exuberance of youth that's sort of unencumbered by the realities of our own obligations and this and that. And we had a really good time with sort of trying to work out, okay, well, what would it look like if Rounded expanded internationally, and we were able to just sort of throw them the ball and say, well, what market are we going to, and where's the opportunity, and how would we modify the product, and how would we approach it, in terms of launching, and we worked with them to build a business case and a pitch over the course of sort of 4 weeks, and then I think we ended up in the centre of Melbourne doing a pitch night along with all the other companies. And so I had to stand up and pitch the business plan that the students had created, and it was a lot of fun. And I think I must have had a good night because I think we came away with the chocolates that night. So
How much of what they put together, if you can go back and remember that, came from them not really having preconceived ideas about the rules of what they can and can't do? I've seen interviews with 14 and 15-year-olds that have been really successful who went and knocked on the door of the top 10 companies in an industry. And people said, "What do you mean you did that?" And they kind of went, "Well, I didn't know you weren't supposed to."
yeah.
Did you experience that with these young people?
Yeah, look, I mean, there was definitely no sense of we can't do it. I mean, I think we were skeptical at the beginning because the whole concept of trying to, it's been hard enough to launch in Australia where we live, let
Yeah.
alone try and launch an app in China or somewhere like that. And so, we probably wouldn't have been a discussion that we would have thought much about had it not been for the students. So, as I said, they certainly brought an energy and some blue sky thinking, I guess is the phrase to the whole project. So it was, yeah, it was a lot of fun to be a part of.
It's interesting, sometimes the younger generations are spoken about not always favorably, by older people. But there's no doubt your energy level and your um, perception of what's possible changes as you get older. And I don't think it changes in an upward direction. I think it levels down. And there might be a great argument for companies just to bring young minds in just to challenge the boundaries that are existing. Um, let's backtrack on a few of the things. Um, beautifully simple accounting software. Right? So there's a constantly changing requirement for compliance and speed and reliability of technology and accuracy. I mean, this is a brutally taxing solution that must be perfect at every level. Like there's no room for mistakes, actually, in terms of what you're doing, because it's the finances of a business. But beautifully simple, right? This experience, this thing. How do you balance off? Because the more something has to deliver perfection and outcome, the more loaded it becomes with features and code and everything else. At that product development level, when you're having these conversations inside, is someone responsible for the beautifully simple part and they lead that charge, and then other people are responsible? How does that all work?
Yeah, so Grant, who's the original founder, whose idea it was, he's the head of product.
Yeah.
And so the app has been largely, almost entirely designed by him. He's exceptionally talented at translating user requirements. He's exceptionally deep thinker. He never ceases to amaze me in terms of how deeply he's able to spend to think and give quality thought to something. I guess again, because one of the things I've learned is that you can build a feature and 90% of it sort of pretty easy, but that last 10%, which might comprise 250 edge cases, will make or break the entire product experience. And if you're not able to sit down and think about those and cater for, you know, at least some of them, it's going to impact what you're able to do. And you know, he's also comes from a creative background, and so the beautiful part, again, was just something that, you know, he's like, I want something that's nice to look at. You know, it's quite simple. And so, you know, rather, again, he built something from the beginning that was nice to look at. But you are, you know, entirely correct that as the app's grown over 10 years, you know, technical redundancy, upgrades, maintenance, you know, our app is enormous now.
Mm.
And you know, more and more time it has to be spent on making sure that it is compliant, that it's safe, that it's secure, all of that sort of thing. So it is a balance, and sometimes that side of things does have an impact on how quickly we can, you know, how quickly we can get new products and features out. And I think, you know, one of the things that we've had to become comfortable with when it's making decisions about what to do when is, you know, are we happy with everything that we're not going to do if we do this?
Mm.
And that's sometimes where the decision has to be made. It's not, you know, you've got to do it, but is it more important than anything else?
Yeah. Are we happy with what we're not going to do
Yeah.
if we do this is a great question, right? Um, it sort of leads us into a bit of a discussion that I hadn't anticipated, but you know, there's almost always a human behind a great company that had a unique um, recipe of qualities and characteristics. Steve Jobs for Apple. No doubt Steve Wozniak was a technical genius, but the beauty and the simplicity of design and the ability to sell it. And you know, I saw an interview where Bill Gates was saying to Steve Jobs, they were being interviewed on stage. Remember, Steve, at one point you were saying one day people will just put their hand on the screen and go like this, and the cursor will follow it. And at that point, Bill Gates was locked into fixed point technology, arrows moving the cursor around on a grid. He just had an ability to see things, you know. Um, what's the challenge for a company where there's an actual physical technical solution, but actually so much of what that is a direct product of the uniqueness of a founder as the founder steps away. And then what you end up with is a whole team of technical people, a whole team of designers, a whole team of customer people, and yet previously it was all in one mind, and so the interactions didn't have to be managed. Um, what's the thinking about how you handle that and keep that
Yeah.
presence?
It's a great question, and I'd say that sort of larger question of succession planning and what the next stage of the business is right where we're at the moment. You
Mm,
know, what do we do with it? You know, how do we give ourselves the space to go and explore other things without compromising the business? You know, those sorts of things. So I don't actually have the answer, but you know, I think that you've identified something, you know, that's not necessarily specific to us, but from a timeline perspective, you know, and we're thinking about sort of broader strategic things. This is exactly, you know, where we're at. As again, as we approach sort of 10 years, it's like, well, you know, where do we go from here? You know, we have been successful. We've got a nicely sustainable, self-sustaining, profitable business, happy customers, you know, all of the rest of it. But you know, what if we did want to do something else? You know, there is that reliance on a few key people at the moment within the business, which you know you would put up there with any other business risk
yeah.
that we have. So we're you know we think about that a lot at the moment and around you know how we can solve that conundrum without compromising what makes rounded rounded.
Yeah, it's I talk a lot in the work that we do. So we, you know, our we help companies capture the company genius into a visual framework that we actually call a genius. So you know, we document procedures in companies and workflows and things like that, and we document the values and the cultural markers that we want to have. But companies, by and large, don't document what is the genius of this company that allowed us to build rounded. You know, and um, you know, as we do that work, you know, I want a beautifully simple model that captures all your thinking into a single framework, right? But as we've done that work over the years with companies, you can almost pick when the key thinkers have stepped back from the company, or have sadly passed away, or whatever, you can almost see the shift in the company, and the product becomes more complex, or the service level drops off, or and sometimes it gets pulled back, but you can almost see the timing, when it happens, and it is a real challenge. And I'm wondering, I've often had the wonder about whether the idea of removing key person risk is actually a realistic business objective. Because as the founders of the business, you're the key people at the moment. And unless you can put your brains into somebody else, eventually all of that wisdom, unless it's codified somehow, exits the business. And it's not like work procedures; it's a different thing altogether.
Well,
Uh,
I think there's probably another perspective to that as well. And, we're also quite conscious as founders that, having been so deeply involved for that amount of time, that, again, another thing that you might, from the outside looking in, say is that, well, there hasn't been enough fresh thinking. There
New
hasn't been
stuff,
enough
yeah,
external input, which is again something else that we've done our best to address in multiple ways over the years. But I think what we hope is that there will, we'll be able to get to a point where there's a natural, we might find somebody or a management team or whatever it looks like that have ideas, skills, and abilities to do things with the company that we were never able. And we also must acknowledge that perhaps there are some of our thinking and some of the restrictions based on our own abilities that have held the company back
yeah,
as well. So I think there's a I think there's a couple of different perspectives that you can have on that discussion, and we will very much approach it in a way that hopefully whatever we do will be the next step for the company and allow the company to do things that it hasn't been able to do before. I'm very much one of my sort of philosophies is that what we're doing now may not be the thing, but as long as it's the thing that gets us to the thing,
yeah,
like if we can make improvements, whether it's in the product or the finances or the business, that's going to open doors for us that weren't open six
yeah.
months ago or whenever it was, and then we've got a whole different array of decisions to make that we can't make now because they're not available to us. So yeah, I think there's different ways that you can look at that.
There are certainly multiple dimensions. The issue of succession doesn't mean replacing like for like.
No, certainly not.
Um, the challenge we see in a lot of companies is they've never actually sat down and decoded what actually is our core genius. So if you think about, rounded, beauty, simplicity, perfection on the back end, this for the freelancer economy, I think targeting that is a part of the genius of the company. So how do we see the succession for the company, without giving up on what is the core genius that allowed us to put a product in the market in the first place? Real humans, in terms of the customer experience and things like that. What any other insights on the freelancer economy? Let's call it freelancer economy wisdom. The gig economy. I mean, it's an economy that's growing worldwide and will continue to, I'm sure. Any kind of notes of wisdom that you have all sort of discovered as you operate in this in that economy all the time? Any insights or observations as a function of being in that market?
I guess yes. I guess the first thing is it never ceases to amaze me the diversity of ways that people make a living. I like to tell the story. We've got, of course, we've got a whole gamut of photographers and graphic designers and tradies and all the things that you'd expect. But we've got one customer who is he's a sheep ultrasound guy. So he has an ultrasound machine and he goes around farms and he tells farmers which sheep are pregnant. He does the ultrasound scans.
Right.
We've got another customer who he makes custom sails for racing for high-end racing yachts. So if you've got a Sydney to Hobart yacht and you need a sail for it, he's the guy that designs and makes it. Very niche, very niche business. And so you just find that we're bumping into people that are doing all sorts of things, and uh, it's just brilliant to see the creativity and of what the Australian freelance marketplace is capable of. That's probably the first thing. And I guess then, really, you do get to see the real diversity as well of capability. Obviously, there are those people that have a lot of commercial acumen that are very well suited and can deal with the rigors of running their own business and sorting their own
Mm.
tax returns out. But you also see a lot of people who suffer a lot, from lack of confidence, and they don't feel like a business owner, and they don't really have confidence around managing their business finances, and they don't have necessarily a lot of discipline or processes in terms of how they go about what they're doing. But they're all very talented and great at what they do. There are just gaps there. So it's it's always there's never a dull moment. It's always very interesting to kind of understand where people are at, what they're doing. But yeah, Australia's full of a lot of very creative people, that's for sure.
And I guess the message there is there is money to be made everywhere
Oh, absolutely.
if you've got your eyes wide open, right? And you find I grew up in the country, on wheat and sheep farms. I didn't know people were roaming around with, with um, ultrasound machines
100%.
actually doing that on property. Um, so the idea of mission beyond product, the idea of, and personal growth for founders, you know, we've spoken a little bit about, what happens when you all want to do other things. But I'm very interested in the idea of stewardship and businesses that play a bigger role in the market or in the community than just, hey, we sell software for freelancers. Um, do you have insights and thoughts around this idea of mission beyond product?
Yeah, so look, we've always worked hard to augment the product with the content, the support, the educational piece, the support of the community, sponsoring conferences for freelancers, sponsoring groups, podcasts, kind of things. There's some of the doors that opened for us as we
Mm,
began to generate more revenue, and we've built some very successful partnerships as well, which we're very grateful for. I think for us, that we want, our goal, our mission is to help our customers, be more confident and run more profitable businesses. And there's a number of different ways that we can do that. And of course, obviously, part of it's the software, which will continue to develop and evolve, and hopefully it becomes more powerful. But there's also a confidence piece,
mm,
about it. The best sort of experiences that we have are often around about this time of year where we get the feedback from customers, and it's essentially what they're saying to us is, I'm way more confident than I was before I was using your product. How that manifests itself is, like last year, tax time was awful. I was using spreadsheets. I had no processes. It took weeks. I had to pay my accountant way more money because everything was a mess. And this year, I sent him all my reports on July 1, and I was done in 5 days, and it was brilliant. And
mm,
you've changed my life.
mm.
And I'm not trying to lay that on thick. We're fortunate that we get that kind of feedback really quite a lot. And it's that kind of thing that when you can help to connect people, and really, the outcome of what you do is to help them enjoy running their business more. That to me is beyond product.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. It's an interesting observation. Mission beyond product doesn't have to be sponsoring orphanages in another country, or it can actually be as direct as transform the lives of your customers by what you put in their hands,
Yep.
and that does, if they replace weeks of work with some reports sent to their accountant, that's extra time they spend building the business or with family, and less stress too, quite frankly, which is quite significant. I'd love to wrap up with two or three quick questions so people maybe know a bit more about you. If you, okay, so if we could go back to 2015, and you've made the decision, you're going to do it, and it's your founding self day one, but you're looking at it from today. What one bit of advice would you give your founding self day one as you launched into it?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's when you're asked that kind of question, there's always part of it that's like, well, look, everything that I've done from that point to now has got me to where I am, and I'm pretty happy with that. So maybe I wouldn't say anything, but I think the thing I wish I knew back then was uh, the size of the opportunity. And that it's not going to get any easier. Like day one was the easiest it was ever going to be. The market was as free as it was ever going to be, and the stakes were as low as they were ever going to be. And I kind of sometimes flippantly like to make the comment that life was so much easier when we had no money and no customers, but it's really true because there was nothing at stake. Now there's the livelihoods of 10 people. There's thousands of customers. There's this really big thing, that we've created. And so, yeah, I think that if I knew then what I knew now, then maybe I would have gone a bit harder.
Yeah,
Maybe I really would have attacked. I mean, not that I didn't, but maybe I just would have attacked it a little bit more and just tried to carve out. Just really understood the freedom that we had
yeah,
to have that first mover advantage.
yeah. The stakes were never going to be lower. It was never going to be any easier. What question do you think every founder should be asking themselves before a product launch, but actually a lot don't? Any thoughts about that?
I think, um, and this may be to the point of the podcast. I think that it's very easy to get wrapped up in starting with the technology.
Yeah,
And I've done my fair share of pitch nights and meeting other founders and talking to other entrepreneurs as well. And I think the ones that sort of set the really good ones apart are the ones that can articulate the problem that they solve.
yeah,
I think the ones that, again, and it may just be down to experience or where they're at on their own journey, but the ones where you sort of begin to learn about a business and you sort of come away from half an hour and you still think, still really don't know what that does.
mm,
And so, I would say like if you're a founder, if you can't answer in a sentence or two, like can you articulate the problem that your product or service really solves, then you probably need to be thinking a little bit more about what you're doing.
mm. And then what uncommon book or experience um, have you had that has significantly shaped how you approach, business problems or actually just thinking in general, I guess. So people might not be familiar with it, the book or the experience.
So I guess and this sort of tangent off from from the discussions we've had around founder expectations and things like that. Um, I've net that the whole sort of growth hacking hustle culture
Yeah.
never really sat well with me. And it took me a while to sort of rationalize that and understand that in my own mind. And I think that sort of mass market software, as a result of hustle culture and growth culture, is in a much worse place than it was
Mm,
perhaps 5 or 6 years ago. And if you use the example of Meta or Facebook, it's horrible to use now.
mm,
You can't actually keep in touch with your friends. You're spammed with ads and AI generated content, and it's just you have to sort of wade through the swamp in that sort of Shawshank Redemption kind of way, to get to the outcome that you want. And it's because software is built now to be measured by a set of arbitrary metrics that are designed to show nothing else but exponential growth.
mm,
Google's the same. If you type a search query into Google, you get the AI generated stuff at the top, then you get 5 lines of sponsored ads, and if you get an organic search result on page one, you're doing pretty well, and that's all because Google wants to demonstrate that its ads are getting more clicks.
mm,
And both of these companies have made changes that are in direct conflict with the overall user experience. And to me, I could never run my company like that.
mm,
And again, okay, I know there may be founders and entrepreneurs that listen to this and sort of fundamentally disagree, and that's fine. But to me, that the whole idea of craft is something that I stumbled upon a few years ago. There is a counterculture of software builders that you can find in various different communities on the web that are really proud of what they do and what they build, and they're really proud of the fact that the software is really well built and does what it's supposed to do without compromising the user experience.
Mm.
And to me, sort of beginning to learn all about that and to realize that there's a different culture for software companies. If you look around, craft is the word that I use. That made me feel a lot more comfortable about where Rounded was and how we were approaching building that company, because that spoke to me about, that's actually exactly articulates how Rounded feels about what it does, because we work so hard on our craft, both on the customer experience and on the software side, to build the best product that we can for our customers. And even if that in the short term doesn't generate as much revenue as it could do if we did other things, we fundamentally believe that creating a great experience is the way to build long-term value and the way to build a long-term company.
It's a great place to end. I think it will. There are people who will resonate with the idea of business as commerce, but there are also people who will resonate with the idea of business as craft, as art, and something that they do want to, create that is beautiful. And I think, and there's a place for everyone to play. Um, and I think, the message underneath that is beware the metrics.
Yeah,
Beware the metrics. So, Oliver, thank you so much for giving us this time today, an insight into an Australian software company starting with nothing. When the stakes weren't quite as high, it was never as easy it was going to be. The market was never more available it was going to be. Only to discover that as a business grows and becomes successful, the complexities go up. But at the same time, you can address a really specific market with a great solution, supported by a focus on people, and make a business work. So I want to thank you for sharing all that with us in this episode of The Wisdom of. So Oliver Garside, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Simon.